All right, so the Mikal Bridges trade basically just went down like probably 20 minutes ago. And after really like getting the full trade package and getting my opinions assorted, I'm pretty confident I hate this trade. Really for the Knicks. I actually love this trade for the Brooklyn Nets, but I really think the New York Knicks, this will probably end up blowing up in their face if I had to guess. And let me just break down my reasoning why. First, the trade package, for anyone that doesn't know the full details, was the New York Knicks got Mikal Bridges and a 2026 second rounder, while the Brooklyn Nets got a 2025 first round unprotected, a 2027 unprotected, 2029 unprotected, and 2031 unprotected to go along with a 2025 protected first round pick from the Milwaukee Bucks and a 2028 pick swap rights to the Nets as well in the first round. To go on top of that, they also got a 2025 second rounder and Bojan Bogdanovic kind of thrown in there. Now, this is an extremely expensive price to pay for Mikal Bridges, but that's not the reason I dislike this trade. I think in a vacuum, for how good Mikal Bridges is, you're going to have to give up a lot to get him. That's not the problem. The problem is I don't think this trade moves the needle at all for the Knicks in the very likely situation that they aren't able to re-sign OG Anunoby. Because OG Anunoby, the whole reason he opted out of his player option is because obviously he wanted more money. And OG and his agent aren't stupid, right? Now that you're in this situation where it is very desperate that you get OG back, because if you don't get OG Anunoby back, you literally basically have the exact same build of your team that you had just last year, minus all the assets you traded to get OG and now Mikal Bridges. So that is an extremely, extremely important spot to look at, because last year, you could make the argument Mikal Bridges is slightly better than OG Anunoby, and I really wouldn't fight you on that, but it's not like the gap between those two players is amazing or anything. And then when you add in the fact that they lost Bojan Bogdanovic plus the players they lost in trading for OG Anunoby in the first place, you could really argue they're in the exact same pool of talent or talent level that they were at before they made any of these trades. And I really don't think it would make that big of a difference, especially if they aren't able to get OG Anunoby back. Because if they don't get OG Anunoby, like I said, they're basically the exact same team they were last year, just with Mikal Bridges instead of OG Anunoby. And although, like I said, I had a huge issue with what they paid to get Mikal Bridges, I don't think you can argue that, that is still a shit ton of picks. To give them 4 unprotected first round picks, the rights to your pick in 2028, among also even picks like the Milwaukee Bucks one, is extremely, extremely concerning. Because say this does blow up, which I think it has a pretty high chance of blowing up in the New York Knicks face. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be terrible by any means. I think they'll still be a fairly solid team. But say in a few years, they realize, okay, we're not the contender level team we wanted to be. They start to blow it up a little bit. And now they find themselves in the situation where these picks that they would have been very valuable to the team and building their team in the future, they no longer have access to. And they could find themselves in a very, very bad situation. And I just think overall, this is a very risky trade for the Knicks because there is far from a guarantee that OG Anunoby will return. Because like I said, with him declining his player option, he did that for a purely monetary reason. Like, the Knicks were good. If he wanted to win, he would have stayed with the Knicks. But now you're going to get in this situation where, one, other teams don't want you to get OG Anunoby back, because if they got an Anunoby back, they're going to be an extremely good and versatile team, which would be very hard to beat in a playoff series. So now other contenders, especially in the East, are going to be willing to pay even more for a guy like OG Anunoby. And for a team in the Knicks situation where there are now currently negative $79 million in cap space, and they still have to re-sign other guys like Isaiah Hartenstein as well, it is very likely that it could get to a point to where OG Anunoby gets such a payday that the Knicks simply wouldn't be able to match it, or they just wouldn't make sense for them to match it. And I just think that is a very, very likely situation to play out, with many contenders having eyes on guys like OG Anunoby. And then also, it is just a factual situation that it is impossible for them to re-sign Isaiah Hartenstein and OG Anunoby while keeping the same roster makeup. Now, yes, they could trade a guy like Julius Randle, but then I think that opens up a whole other can of worms where if they trade Julius Randle, I'm not sure they have enough offense to even compete for a championship anymore. So that is a whole different can of worms that we'll get into later if they do end up making that move. So there is right now literally an impossibility, unless they both would take unbelievable pay cuts, which is not going to happen, for them to re-sign two major free agents and two major role players for them last year. And I just don't see it happening. And I think with the very likely scenario that OG Anunoby is going to get into a bidding war and eventually someone's just going to offer so much money for him that it's just not going to be realistic for the Knicks to match that, and he's going to end up walking, is going to make this trade look extremely, extremely bad for the Knicks going into the future. Now, yes, there still might be a high-level playoff team, second-round playoff team going into next year, because even though it's going to be the same team they had last year, that same team was still a very solid playoff level team, and they were just a few injuries away from really being a much even more competitive playoff team. But then again, that is still not a championship level team, and I don't think that team could beat Boston even if they were fully healthy by any means. So I think for sure is going to be a huge situation where although they're going to remain a good team, I'm not sure this trade really moves the needle at all, especially if OG Anunoby does end up leaving them. And then from the Brooklyn Nets perspective, I think this is a great move because it's obvious Brooklyn's going to end up tanking because they also just made a trade right after with the Houston Rockets to get the rights to their next year pick back as well. And I think the reason they did that is because a guy named Cooper Flagg is supposed to be the first overall pick. And although I haven't scouted him yet and I won't be doing that until the end of this draft, which is in a few days now. But until that happens, I won't look into him. But a lot of people are saying Cooper Flagg could be a potentially generational talent. And I think the Brooklyn Nets are kind of gearing up for a tank to really give themselves a position to be able to make that move and draft him next year. So I think with them getting tons of draft capital, with them tanking, they're kind of putting themselves in a very good situation to really be able to have a very bright future. And on top of that, they still have a lot of other trade assets on that team that they can go forward with in trading, getting even more draft capital and making it even more likely they're going to be able to get Cooper Flagg. I just think overall the Brooklyn Nets are going about this the right way and probably will end up being in the future the winners of this trade. And it's really all hinges on the OG Anunoby situation, and with it probably being likely that he is not going to be returning to the New York Knicks, this trade could very much blow up in their face very, very quickly into the future. Now, like I said, I don't think the Knicks are going to be bad next year no matter what, but I do think in a few years down the line, this trade could very much hinder them, especially if OG leaves and the ceiling of this team really doesn't get raised at all by the trade that they ended up making.